As 2023 comes to a close, we are taking the opportunity to look back at the year and revisit some of our interviews. We will hear from state and municipal leaders, nonprofit organizations, librarians, and historians. The Municipal Voice is a Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state and local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or our member municipal leaders. First up, we look back to our interview with Secretary of the State, Stephanie Thomas, where we discussed the importance of voting. Secretary Thomas, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Good to have you. So it's been almost 100 episodes and 3.5 years on the Municipal Voice since we last had the Secretary of State on the show, which at that time was still Denise Merrill, your predecessor. And that was in a previous election cycle, so we were talking about voting access. Was important then, still important now. Why is voting so important?
Oh my gosh. How much time do you have, Matt?
Here's another question. Why is voting important?
I mean, it really is the underpinning of our democratic process, our system of government. We have a representative democracy, so we as electors get to vote who will represent us at the table, so to speak. So having access to the vote and making sure that everyone who does have access is using that vote, I think without that, our democracy is floundering.
Yeah. And speaking of making sure everyone's using that right, our members of CCM are municipal leaders of the towns and cities across the state. And this next election is going to be a municipal election. And generally, these elections get a turnout under 35%.
Yeah.
What is the connection between the popularity and quest for greater access and the fact that we have such a low turnout year after year?
I think about low turnout a lot, but I think it is because we as a nation don't really invest in civic literacy. When, I look at what's done at the federal, the state, and the local level, no one is really investing in helping voters carry out this most important civic duty. Sure, there's some education depending on what state you're in and what grade you're in. But in general, I just think it's woefully lacking. And I think voters have gotten a bad rap in some ways, like they don't care. So they're not showing up in municipal election years. And there may be some of that, but I also think they aren't well informed. And what a lot of registrars will tell me is if people aren't sure, that also keeps them from the polls. If they don't feel informed about what's on the ballot, how the system works, or what they might face when they get there, that is another way of preventing full turnout, if you will. I also believe we have highest turnout in presidential years because, face it or not, whether we want to face it or not, we are a very sort of television-based culture. And the airwaves are flooded for sometimes as long as a year with ads reminding people that an election is coming. And even when there's a gubernatorial election, for example, you saw that last year here in Connecticut. But for municipal elections, no one can afford to go up on television. So I talk to people all the time who have no idea that there's a primary coming up in September. And, they know there's an election, but they don't really have it starred on their calendar. So I think we as government can do a lot more to help imbue voters with the confidence to know when elections are and what they can expect.
So that as a government, you can do that stuff. And then is there some stuff more specifically that your office can do to help drive those numbers up?
Sure. Our office is trying to partner with as many organizations as possible who are as interested as we are in providing nonpartisan information to help voters understand how to engage with our democracy. One program that we started, we call it our CEO program, and it stands for Civically Engaged Organizations. I'm a business owner. As you know, we also deal with business services here. And it occurred to me that all the businesses I know involved with their community, whether it's donating to Little League or doing a Earth Day cleanup. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if they also got involved with civics, letting their customers or clients or employees know when an election is coming up, how to register to vote, how to find your polling place. And I have had at least one municipality reach out to me about joining the program as well. And I think that would be a great way to partner with CCM's members, because I feel if you keep it top of mind, it's more likely to happen. So our office puts together nonpartisan tools like simple social media slides, fact sheets. Like right now, the big thing we're working on is a college 101 because college students don't know what to do. So it would be great if municipalities joined our CEO program and help us get the word out.
Very cool. Well, some of them might be listening right now, so maybe they will. I think it's important. You mentioned that it's nonpartisan, and that's good to remember. Is that it's not about which side of the issue on that everybody should vote. It's good for everybody. You're not just trying to encourage one side or the other. Everybody vote your conscience. So you spoke at this year's Representation Matters, which is a CCM program where we do a 2-day training with the campaign school at Yale that was aimed to help people of color seek office, serve boards and commissions. And you spoke about your path to elected office and how unlikely it seemed, at every turn. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I always tell people, don't do it the way I did it. But the way I did it, on paper, it shouldn't have worked. But it was very organic. And what I do say is that people should follow their passions. I had a long career in the nonprofit sector. I was very happy doing that work. I was running my own fundraising consulting firm and doing quite well. And it wasn't until I started meeting some people locally, going to meetings and finding out how things worked. And I think I never considered myself someone who would run for office or get involved in what I called politics, although now I would say it's getting involved in governance. I thought I was doing the public good in the nonprofit space, but I saw a need. I saw that there weren't a lot of people who were like me. And some people think I mean as a woman or as a woman of color, and I do mean those things, but I also mean as a nonprofit professional. I would sit at a table and hear people discuss a problem, and I would say like, hey, the nonprofit solved this problem 10 years ago. You didn't know that this was the best way to handle it, and people didn't know sometimes. So I ran for office. I petitioned my way onto the ballot because I had passed the convention dates, and I ran what I like to describe as a very organic, last minute campaign. I really got started very late summer, and I lost that election, but only by a few hundred votes, which I considered a win. And then I decided to run again for different reasons. And I won. And then I decided to run for secretary because it was a job that really appealed to me. It was not the sort of, I don't know, luster of serving at the constitutional level. But two of my passions are civic engagement, civic education, and making sure people vote in every single election. But I also love business because I'm a small business owner, and I worked for a small business for 20 years prior to that, opening my own. So I felt like the secretary's office involved both things that I love. So I applied for the job, and here I am.
And here you are. So it sounds like, in your previous nonprofit work and then in what you're doing now, that, as you mentioned, civic engagement is a large part of that. What is your vision for civic engagement?
Oh, I think at its core, my vision is to encourage people to think differently. I would love to get to a point where there was federal and state investment in civic education and civic engagement. Um, when I speak with groups, I often talk about, especially high schoolers, for example, I say to them, like, do you play a sport? And almost all of them raise their hand. And I say, what if you played that sport one day a year? How good would you be? And they're like, oh, we would suck. And I think the same is true with our representative democracy. You can't just vote and like poof, like magic, everything suddenly works out. If you don't add the engagement piece, we're only sort of half living. So even people who vote don't think that they need to communicate to their representatives. I'm sure every town manager would love to know what their constituents think and have issues brought up to them, so that, because they can't be everywhere. And the same is true with elected officials. So my vision is to teach people what I like to call civics you can use, how to engage with your community. One example, I was speaking with a group, and a 22-year-old woman, I said, like, who has had a problem in their town or their community that they wanted solved? She complained about a huge pothole that was at the end of her parents' driveway, and it drove her family crazy. So I said, oh, well, what'd you do about it? And she was like, oh, we don't do anything. I said, well, did you call the city and let them know the pothole was there? And she's like, oh, no, I didn't know you could do that. And like, that's a low hanging example, but people just, I think, have gotten used to complaining and thinking that government is not there for them. And I think people who govern are like, I wish people would give me some input and let me know what some of the problems are. So my vision is that it's more of a two-way street, and it's more community based.
Is that something that's more recent? Like, were in the past, were people more civically engaged? Were there civics classes? And is that something that we should kind of bring back, like in high school or something, like civics, history, English, just another subject?
Yeah, I would love to see civics integrated into education. It did used to be taught. Anyone my age also remembers there was public broadcasting money to do things like Schoolhouse Rock. But when I talk to seniors, they often talk about how, and I'm thinking, people 70 and over, like, I've never missed an election. I vote every time. And how come the young people don't feel the same way? But they had civics in school, and many of them also lived through wartime, where there was much more of a national identity. And I think that has stayed with them. There was one piece of legislation I introduced this year that never made it through the process, but that is pre-registration of 16-year-olds, because that's a time when many are interacting with the DMV, so that when they're 18, they're already in the system and can be confirmed and activated. Because it shows if you have these civic lessons and think about it earlier in life, you're more likely to be a voter throughout the rest of your life.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM. Next up, we revisit our Spooky October episode with Jeff Bellinger. With decades of experience in the paranormal and spectacular, he's a writer for the hit show Ghost Adventures and an Emmy-nominated producer and host of his own show, New England Legends. Can you tell us about the mythical Glowacus and its connection to Connecticut journalistic history?
Yeah, so the Glowacus is a great story. January of 1939, there was the Hartford Times and the Hartford Courant. Those are the two big papers in Hartford. And the Hartford Times started to report that there was a strange creature that was killing animals at some of the regional farms. Absolutely newsworthy, important news. So other farmers could read and say, oh, I better be a little more vigilant right now. Of course, important. But then some of the eyewitness reports started to come out of seeing this animal, and they described it as like a black, like puma. And of course,
Okay.
pumas don't belong in Connecticut. Mountain lions do show up in Connecticut, but they're not black. They don't turn up all black. So suddenly, people are describing this black thing, this black cat-like creature that's been hunting animals. The Hartford Current sort of went off the rails with descriptions. So what went from like a puma-like creature to it's got the body of a dog and a head like a lion and a horn, and it cries blue tears. Like in the span of like 2 or 3 weeks, it went from an unusual black cat-like creature to something you've never seen or heard of before. And they started calling it the Gloacus. And the more Gloacus reports that came in, Hartford Current started drawing maps. Hartford Times tried to be journalistic, and the Hartford Current started selling advertising. So like one of my favorites, there was like a gas station was saying, use SO oil to make a quick getaway from the Gloacus. And there's an ad they ran of a woman's hair salon that said, don't look like a Gloacus, get a permanent, done here for whatever the money. And so over the span of like 3 or 4 weeks, the Hartford Current just went nuts talking about, and the Gloacus, it sounds almost Latin, right? Like there's this new animal. And then eventually it came through that an editor at the Hartford Current had named it for Glastonbury, Wacky, and Us, the Gloacus. But the funny thing is, this is folklore, right? In the span of 4 weeks, which is really traceable, right? You can go back 4 weeks. Going back 40, 50, 100, 200 years is difficult. Going back 4 weeks is a snap. And so you watched it go from, hey, careful farmers, there's an animal lurking, killing animals, to weird, it's black, like a cat, doesn't belong around here, to lion that cries blue tears and, is
almost like a chupacabra or something.
That's right. Yeah. And so that was in the span of just 4 weeks. And what I love about that is it's not a yarn, right? It's a cautionary tale. And so if you're a farmer, you're probably not even sleeping anymore, but damn it, that thing's not getting any of my animals, right? You're out there with the shotgun all night long waiting.
Watching out.
Yeah. So it served a purpose. After about 4 or 5 weeks just plastering the news, the most American thing that could ever happen happened. And that is everybody got bored with it and the news cycle moved on. It didn't turn up. That was it. It was over.
No front page like, oh, oops, there isn't one. It was just something else.
There was one.
The Winstead Wild Man?
The wild man, right? So, but there was a Gloacus. There was an animal killing animals on farms, but they just sort of moved on. The dead one, they didn't shoot it dead and say, here, we've got it. They didn't say it's moved on. It just got bored and moved on with the next news cycle. Well done.
Good job, Gloacus.
Yeah.
This September, we spoke with Waterbury Mayor and former CCM President Neil O'Leary about his decision not to run after 12 years in office and lessons he's learned along the way. As you mentioned, you've gotten a lot of things done, some things they're still working on. What's something that you learned on the job that you might have thought initially would be easier, but turned out to be an uphill battle, or vice versa, something that you thought was going to be a lot harder than it turned out to be?
Well, I think that to be a successful mayor, one of the things you have to do is you have to build relationships with certainly the state of Connecticut, both your local representatives and your state senators. And I credit CCM, Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, for teaching and mentoring all of us newly elected people during our early years in office, and how important it is to build those relationships. And I was very fortunate to build strong relationships with both Governor Malloy and our current governor, Lamont. And I considered both of them to be huge mentors for me, quite frankly. And, I think that the challenge that most people have is getting involved with really partisan politics. I think that's where it falls apart, right? So I, as a Democrat, I was lucky. So Malloy was a Democrat and Governor Lamont is obviously a Democrat, but I learned the value of working with the Republican Party as well, and getting things done for the city of Waterbury. In many occasions, I had built strong relationships with people on both sides of the aisle, and went to Hartford very, very frequently. I was a staple in the legislative office building, pretty much during the last 12 years of my office. And became fast friends with a lot of those great people. Some of them are gone on to retirement and greener pastures, if you will. But still building those strong relationships, I think. I thought it would be difficult, but it really wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be, because people, they actually, elected officials really want to help cities like Waterbury, and especially, the leadership on both caucuses, both the Democrats and Republican caucuses have been very, very helpful over my 12-year tenure, but particularly in the last several years, we've really, enhanced those relationships, and that has proven to be very helpful for the city in many different ways, from funding to battling COVID, to everyone putting politics aside and doing what's right for not only our city of Waterbury, but quite frankly, for every other city and town in the state. That's where CCM came in on many different occasions. And of course, during COVID, I mean, we all decided what was most important, and we worked together. And I think that period of time made those relationships even stronger.
Everyone had to work together. There wasn't a lot of other options.
There were not a lot of options, and there's a lot of politics came out through that. Remember, Matt? So masks, no masks, in school, out of school. Parental anxiety over many of those issues, and I will always credit Governor Ned Lamont for his leadership during that really difficult period of time, because he brought people together on every level and worked really well, not only with the state legislature, but most importantly, he worked really well with the local officials. And so politics is local, right? And so, it was the boots on the ground. The governor visited not only Waterbury on numerous occasions during COVID, but most cities and towns throughout the state as well. And his presence made a big difference in quelling a lot of that anxiety that was coming during those period of times, particularly the partisan politics. I think the governor taught us all a lesson that we all needed to work together and build relationships, and those relationships still last to this minute.
You mentioned CCM, and one thing that's important to us here at CCM certainly was your time as our president of the board of CCM. What was your experience as president? What was something that you got done as president that you're proud of?
I have to tell you, I think, by the way, I was the president for 2 consecutive years of CCM, which I thoroughly enjoyed. First of all, the staff at CCM is amazing and hardworking and very knowledgeable. And the leadership was very, very helpful. And as the incoming president, I enjoyed every minute of my time for those 2 years. I think the thing that I enjoyed the most, quite frankly, was at our meetings is making sure that everyone's concerns were addressed, right? Don't forget, CCM makes up 169 cities and towns in Connecticut. From our very smallest communities to our largest communities. And the needs are very different, right? So the smallest community has a completely different set of needs compared to Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, and Waterbury, right? And then you get into your mid-sized cities. And I think what we try to do, and I think CCM has done very well and continues to do even before I became president, and certainly since, is to make sure that CCM itself operates in a very transparent manner, understanding that 169 cities and towns is not an easy task to keep people happy. But I think that the leadership of those cities and towns recognize and understand that CCM is there to help and to advocate for the cities and towns through the legislature and, of course, through the governor's office. And I think CCM has been very successful. And that's why the membership is so strong in, working really hard and diligently for our cities and towns and our residents of the state, and forging really strong relationships with the leaders of both the Democratic caucus and the Republican caucus, and of course the governor's office.
Yeah. One thing we always stress at CCM is cooperation between towns and cities, regionalization in some cases. How important was collaboration to you personally in City Hall and in your region?
Oh, very important. And those are the things that you learn as a newly elected. I joined the city of Waterbury when I got elected, quite frankly, was not part of CCM, which always was very confusing to me. So we joined CCM right away. And CCM provided a platform of good learning, not only attending CCM events throughout the state of Connecticut, but also working with the U.S. Conference of Mayors throughout the country. You can learn what's happening and what's important in your state, such as ours in Connecticut. But when you're a part of the larger picture, you can also learn what's important around the country and the challenges that each community faces. And most importantly, I think, Matt, you learn to collaborate with people and to understand each other's needs and try to figure out solutions instead of just piling on, if you will. So I think that's what I learned most from CCM. And I think, the successful picture simply is transparency, commitment, compassion, understanding each other and your understanding each other's needs, and really trying as much as humanly possible, recognizing how strong partisan politics is, not only in our state, in our country, but also recognizing that the real work gets done in a bipartisan fashion. And if you can really, put all your egos aside and personalities aside, you can really get some really good work done, especially with a, strong governor such as Governor Lamont.
Yeah. So as we mentioned earlier, you are the longest consecutively serving mayor in Waterbury history. In our first episode of the Municipal Voice in 2023, we interviewed Courtney Renton and Nasima Gilson of City Seed, a nonprofit that runs a popular farmers market in New Haven that connects folks in underserved communities with good quality local produce, allowing city residents to have a positive relationship with food resources. As you mentioned, one of the first things was the markets, and I think a lot of people who might be familiar with the term food desert, which at certain times in the past, certainly New Haven has had areas that lack great food resources. Why is it important that to connect New Haven residents with good quality local food through programs like the farmers market?
Yeah, so I think food access is really core to what City Seed does and core to the founding of the organization when the markets first started in 2004. There's been kind of an interesting shift within the food policy world of moving away from the term food desert and thinking of them more as food apartheid. And I think that's for a few reasons. One, sort of recognizing that deserts are in and of themselves an abundant ecosystem. And in that same way, kind of labeling any particular neighborhood or part of a city as a desert is ignoring a lot of the life and vitality that is there, but maybe isn't captured or measured by traditional sort of forms of data collection or government agencies, but then also kind of understanding like the very human systems that can cause a lack of access to food or a lack of grocery stores in a particular neighborhood, that there's like a real system at play in that. And so this kind of term food apartheid has really taken off to just sort of recognize some of those shifts. So it is very important for City Seed, both through our farmers markets and all the work that we do, to think about access to food, whether that's for customers who are purchasing food at the farmers markets, but also access to opportunity, whether that is for the chefs who participate in Sanctuary Kitchen or the entrepreneurs in our program. All of our farmers markets accept and double SNAP, otherwise known as food stamps, as well as WIC and senior programs. So we were the first market in Connecticut to accept SNAP at the farmers market. So that's core to our DNA and really important part of what we do. We've seen food insecurity rise with the pandemic. That's been a lasting legacy, even once COVID has felt like it's over, though we all know that it's not. So over the last couple of years, we've seen SNAP redemption at our markets double and continue to be on the rise, which I think is a really good indicator of the economic reality for a lot of families in New Haven still, in a way that we try to combat that. And then we really like to think about core root causes. So there's an amazing network in New Haven of kind of what we think of as like emergency food providers, soup pantries, food kitchens, amazing food banking network. our farmers markets are kind of a piece of that puzzle
Yeah.
because people are able to spend their benefits at the markets. But then we really like to think upstream of what's causing this issue in the first place. And really it's poverty, wealth distribution, access to opportunity. And so that's where training programs like Sanctuary Kitchen and our entrepreneurship work really come in to think about how can we provide opportunity, jobs, the ability for people to control their livelihoods through food as this amazing tool for economic development upstream. So all of our programs have a different kind of approach to food access and food equity in different ways, and work together to make sure that people in New Haven are getting access to local healthy food, which is a human right.
Yeah. And you call it now, you're saying you want to call it food apartheid, and you mentioned equity. I know at CCM, one of our recent efforts the last couple of years has been towards equity issues. And you mentioned, that there's a lot of historical reasons. Is there a lot of correlation between what we now are calling food apartheid and like historical like redlining and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, this could be, I'm sure this is somebody's entire master's thesis or PhD thesis, right? But absolutely, I think the same COVID in many ways just heightened awareness of inequity that was already prevalent in the system. And so I think we've seen that show up in housing, healthcare, certainly food security, job security, all these other issues. And, City Seed is a unique organization in that we really look at the food system holistically. So, we're talking about food access, we're talking about sustainable agriculture, we're also thinking about immigration, healthcare, just all of these issues that I think have, as you pointed out, have been brought to light over the last couple of years. And I think the power is really in those intersections and those partnerships where we can, really think on the city level. We're talking about the city of New Haven and how we can make some systemic change.
Yeah. You mentioned partners. You partner quite a bit with local organizations and the city to help create kind of a positive ecosystem. What do you look for in a partnership with another organization?
That's a great question. We love our partnerships. It's really one of the benefits of having been in the city for almost 20 years. It's been such an honor to be a steward of this organization and to, enter into meetings and partnerships and hear people's stories about their relationship with City Seed over the years as it's grown. We work really closely with the city of New Haven, mayor's office, economic development, food system policy division. Those partnerships are really integral into making all of our programs happen. And then we've got amazing partnerships with, lots of other organizations around the city. I'm sure Nasima will talk about Iris, that has just been core to Sanctuary Kitchen. We work really closely with the Dixwell Q House that just opened about a year ago in Dixwell to open a brand new farmers market location there. Oh, cool. And new kitchen programming in that space. We work closely with Collab, which is another entrepreneurship organization in the city. I could go on. And I think, New Haven is such a civically minded city, which is exciting. There's so many nonprofits doing amazing work. So we really try to think about, where can we be additive and not duplicative? How can we enhance each other's work? What's another organization's core competency that, they might do something differently than we do? And how can we lift each other up, especially recognizing in a lot of cases that we're serving similar people. So how can we really make those connections and not always reinvent the wheel, always with an eye towards, equity and impact.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM. Back in March, E.J. Crawford and Brendan Toller of Westport Library and Verso Studios joined us for a conversation about the evolution of public libraries. Now, one of the more unique things, and the reason we have you guys on today, is to talk about Verso Studios. And Westport Library is billed as the first public library in the country to produce a vinyl record. So how did Verso Studios come about? Was this like one person's pipe dream, or was it just an idea that seemed good for the residents of Westport? How did this all come together?
So we had incredible success, and this is before my time at the library, but they had incredible success with the Makerspace program, which is, 3D printing. And there was a lot of attention and eyes on that. And they sort of found that they felt like they kind of peaked at a certain audience. So they thought, well, how can we take this expansion in library services and resources, and what could we apply it to? And rightfully, the executive director, Bill Harmer, who comes from Michigan, and he's been with the library for about 7 or 8 years, thought, well, media has kind of a limitless potential, whether it's production or theory or classes, or the other side, just pure entertainment, or stepping into different perspective in sharing, film screenings, performances. So we've been off and running. That the transformation of the library, i.e. the renovation, ended in about 2019. And then, of course, we all know what happened then after that. So it sort of feels like we're getting our footing right now. And so Verso Studios is open to everyone. Doesn't even matter if you have a library card, although we'd love for you to have one. You should have one.
So much of what Verso is reimagining, what a library looks like for the 21st century, right? I mean, we have a community, and that's obviously in Westport, but beyond Westport as well. They're seeking to kind of, every library is all about kind of like growth and learning and knowledge and kind of a shared community space, and that's what we really want, the Westport Library to be, and books are such an important part of that, right? I mean, we have an incredible group of people who work here, reference librarians and patron services, and all that is incredibly important to who we are and what we do still. But, it's not the only thing that we do. And we also know that, if we're going to meet people where they are, we got to be able to expand into other spaces, and having capability with Verso to do TV and broadcast and to do post-production and to have, a full like sound system and to have all those capabilities really gives us so much more that we can provide to the community. And again, that's Westport community and beyond, Fairfield County and beyond.
So just kind of beyond the kind of older idea of libraries, just a place where you keep books. Like
right.
In 2023, what is a library to the public, and what needs does it serve? I guess is part of the questions you're asking with the makerspace and Verso and these kind of non-traditional library facilities.
Right. 100%. And we have like a library of things where you can come and rent, a kayak or a microscope, or, we have meeting rooms so that people can come and work. I mean, we have people, you can see the same people every day, people who just use our library as an office. We have computers you can rent. And so, Verso is kind of the next kind of step with all that. It's kind of the logical progression. And we're fortunate to have the ability to do so. We're fortunate we did a major renovation in 2018, 2019 that allowed us to kind of build out these spaces to offer, these services. And, it also allows us to have programs and events that, a lot of libraries can't. I mean, it allows us to host, we can have a band on stage and 600 people in our forum, right? These aren't things that, you traditionally think of a library being able to do, but it's things that we can do. And I think that brings so much more to our community and gives us so many opportunities.
Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNHH 103.5 FM. Christopher Gilson is our producer, Harry Draws is on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like, and watch out for our CCM chat series on our YouTube page.